So very warmly, let's greet the Minister of Finance, Mr. Mauricio Cárdenas Santamaría. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Mr. Botero will welcome you formally. When the history of these years and very interesting times we're experiencing is written, historians will surely highlight the great feat consisting in withstanding a very large macroeconomic adjustment, keeping the ship afloat, guaranteeing a growth which is modest at present, but as forecasts and indicators being revealed show, very slowly its course will accelerate. Of course, Colombia will still not have the possibility of returning to a potential high growth, but that is in expectation that in a couple of years will probably be met. It is recognized that Colombia has a robust macroeconomic institutionality controlled by an independent central bank, a Ministry of Finance and Planning department that meet their duties with technical rigor, but also that the tradition of very good ministers of finance in Colombia is a constant. And although the average is high, Mauricio Cárdenas within this tradition holds a very noteworthy position. This is the last time Mauricio Cárdenas, as Minister of Finance of President Santos, attends our annual event. He has made extreme efforts to be here with us today. I want to greet him with much gratitude and congratulate him for the great work he has done thus far. Minister, we're very interested in hearing what you have to say. Thank you very much, Humberto, for your warm words. I was not expecting them. It's true. It's been like 6 conventions. But time passes, but still challenges and joint work remain. And the balance is good. That's the most important thing. The balance is positive for the country and especially for the insurance industry. I want to greet especially Senator Claudia Lopez, Didier Burgos from Congress, Oscar Darío Pérez also from Congress was here. I don't see him now. All the members of the Fasecolda board, its members, all of you, thank you for being here. Surely because of flight issues, not such a large delegation from the insurance companies could be here, but here we are, and especially to convey a message that I hope you will help multiply at the different companies, fora, etc. So let me begin along the lines of what Jorge Humberto just said. We have had to face very important challenges, big challenges, like very few times happen in a country's history. And what is more satisfactory is that Colombia has proven it has a very solid economic institutionality beyond the individuals, beyond the circumstances. We have institutions that allow us to address clashes or shocks that we consider extreme. And this institutionality has risen in Colombia because we have had very high defenses against populism. In Colombia, there has not been populism, and we have to ensure that there isn't populism in the future. That is the message from my standpoint, the most important message to ensure good economic management. Why hasn't there been populism in Colombia? Perhaps because we have experienced it very closely and we have been immune to it. We've seen it in our neighbors, and we've seen that populism truly does not allow a society to grow. So, message related to what Alvaro Vargas Llosa just said, I believe we must insist and emphasize on, especially in this pre-electoral period. I am going to use this presentation, is it ready? To tell you a bit about this story. History says that in our recent history, the most recent chapter of our history, that of responsibility.
Okay, I'll give my presentation without slides. Very few times in the history of Colombia had we had to face such a strong drop in our exports. Exports dropped in 50%. That has only happened during the last 150 years in two additional periods: the 1000-day wars by the end of the 19th century and the Great Depression of the 30s. Given that strong drop in exports, Colombia could have had a crisis, a recession. That had always happened like that whenever we had a strong drop in exports. We avoided a crisis or a recession. The country kept on moving forward, perhaps at a slower pace than the one we had during our oil price boom, but we didn't move backwards in any of the indicators. And we kept moving forward, mainly in the social part. The economy had to readjust, and to readjust, many variables were affected, such as the exchange rate, interest rate, taxes, to adjust to that new reality. During that process, the economy has stabilized again, and it's showing a recovery. Recent data indicate that the economy is growing more. The second semester is going to be better than the first semester of this year. So the message is this economy has been strong. It has been able to adapt to those changes. And after that adjustment, which is leveling up to a new reality, adjusting to lower income, and now we are recovering our growth path. How should we plan our businesses? Exactly, taking into account that this is an economy that is increasingly going to have better results. What has happened in the financial sector. The most important thing is that it has been a very strong sector. The economy has withstood many things, more so the financial sector, because it has experienced high growth rates, and that's necessary for the economy because the financial sector accounts for 21% of GDP, which means that if the financial sector is still dynamic, it has been a fundamental pillar for those economic outcomes. How come we have had high dynamism in the financial sector? Mainly because financial inclusion policies have given good results. We have increasingly more depositors and financial accounts. Credit is still growing. We have more presence throughout the country through the financial system. We have a financial sector with new actors, with higher investment. We have had foreign investment buying instruments in Colombia, and that has become a factor that allows for the financial sector to grow at rates higher than the rest of the economy, and it is the sector that is it's pulling those indicators. So the financial sector has been fundamental. Behind the good performance of the financial sector, we have two elements. One is a system that has been well regulated, well supervised. In other words, a system that has no capital problems. It is well capitalized, that given any unforeseen event, any portfolio deterioration, the sector can respond to that. And that is something that we have resulting from the crisis of 1998, when we strengthened the financial regulation. The last measure, the last chapter of that history of a good financial oversight was used by the Congress of the Republic a couple of weeks ago, and it was the final approval of the law that will enable to oversee financial conglomerates and mainly their holdings. 4 failed attempts when they tried to issue a law, but we finally achieved that result. That's very important because we not only have to understand well the situation of a bank, insurance company, pension fund, but we have to understand the relationship they can have with other financial companies that belong to the same group. Those links must be externalized, must be made visible in order to regulate better, and then the holding should be as such, even though it doesn't have financial activities, it should be overseen, and that's what we achieve with that law. And that holding, at the same time, should have a capital requirement, should maintain certain capital levels to cover the risk of all of its affiliates. That's a fundamental step. It had not been easy to put this in place in Colombia. Many people were reluctant to that, but at last we attained it. And this is promoted by the access to OECD. We learned this after the 2008 and 2009 crisis in developed countries, based on the recommendations that were made by all of the multilateral agencies. I'm happy that the Congress of the Republic has adopted that, and it was something unanimous. All the groups supported that, and that is to strengthen more financial supervision and to protect the financial sector from possible deteriorations. Can I pass the slides here? Okay, I'm going to start with this. We live in a better country. We are a very sound country. Well, the starting point is, okay, we had a very strong shock. However, the patient had good health, a stronger patient, which is the best way to measure the strength of a society. In my opinion, social indicators The social indicators summarize everything, mainly the level of poverty in Colombia. In 2010, 30% of the population was in poverty levels, and last year it was 17.8%. This has to do with the quality of houses, access to education, the education level of the members of the household. That's the multidimensional poverties. Thank you. A country with less unemployment. A country that has created more employment, 3.5 million employments as of 2010. And that's very important for this insurance company to have a more formal country. We were a country where informality was generalized. Most of the people employed or people occupied in our country were in informal employment. That's a milestone we achieved a couple of months ago. We have more people working with a labor agreement, with French benefits, with pension payments by employees. Usually here, people used to work without any type of social security. However, we experienced the shock, and when you analyze it after it happens with certain perspective, you realize the size of that shock. Then, the most important thing is to keep on trusting in the country, to have sufficient force to overcome that issue or that problem. But today, if we look backwards and we analyzed what happened, we really see that dimension of what happened. All exports dropped in 67%, around $28 billion to over $9 billion this year. And fiscal income that were coming from the oil sector, they disappeared. In 2013, we received 24 billion pesos in the fiscal, Colombian pesos. So it was 1 out of every 5 pesos. And we not only received foreign currency, and also foreign companies investing in Colombia brought in many resources that strengthened our economy. In 2013, 4.1 billion Colombian pesos. And this year, $2.2 billion. So that shows the size of the shock we had to face. The first defense line, which was highly criticized then, I was on the front pages of the Semana magazine. It's that the country is getting poorer because the first defense line, given the drop in oil prices, was devaluation. And the oil price dropped in 70%, and the dollar increased in 70%. So the first line of defense was fundamental to stabilize the economy, because this enabled that if we had a drop in exports, we also expected a drop in exports in order to close that external gap. So this forced us to stop importing, consuming more natural products, and to stabilize our balance of payment. However, this had an undesirable consequence, and at the same time it was unavoidable. That is that if imported products prices go up, then obviously the prices increase in the economy, and that leads to inflation. So that's like a natural effect. It is a natural consequence of devaluation, worsened by another fact, which was El Niño phenomenon. That was the worst we had in the history. We had an increase in food prices, and that resulted in more inflation. And we had devaluation, increase in the price of food. There was another one, which is the result of human decisions, and that was the transportation or the truck strike. So mid last year, we had an inflation of almost 9%. With an inflation of that size, which is out of the comfort zones, which is the inflation target the central bank has. Obviously, the central bank responded, as all the central banks respond, to try to take inflation, to target inflation, and they did it through increasing the interest rate. The red line shows the intervention line of the central bank that reached its maximum last year, 7.55%. But it achieved its goal, and that is to have a drop in inflation. Today it is 3%, and that's the inflation for September. So the idea is to put back inflation in the inflation target. In economics, you have to prioritize objectives. First, inflation needs to be controlled. If that's not the case, then you lose trust in the economy, you lose purchasing power. So the idea is to put it back in the target inflation path. And inflation expectations for a 12-year term, that's where we think that inflation is going to be in 12 months, 3.6%. The objective was met. However, I mean, this is not a free ride. If you increase interest rates, to produce this effect of reducing inflation obviously has a consequence. And it's an unfortunate consequence because then you experience a slowdown in the economy, you stop consumption, it takes away demand from the economy. So what we saw in the first half of this year, which is a halt in consumption, is the consequence of having had high interest rates last year. The reduction of interest rates by the central bank should irrigate the rest of the economy, should help lower the interest rates paid by all the agents of the economy. And this process of transmission of the monetary policy is like in two lanes, a fast lane and a slow lane. The fast lane is credits to companies. If you start in December 2016, if you put it in zero, when the interest rate of the central bank started dropping, one finds that the interest rate for most of business loans, preferential, regular, treasurers loans, they have dropped in the same proportion, that is 250 base points. But that hasn't happened in households. The interest rate of consumption loans have not dropped that much. Take a look at the yellow line. The yellow line represents consumption credits. They have dropped only 50 base points. So that channel is lower, and that has been the core topic of our relationships with the banks in recent months. For the consumption interest rates drop quicker. Okay, we have the Ushers Rate, which is the green line. This Ushers Rate is important because it's not only the cap, but they take it as the one charged by credit cards. Hence, it is necessary to find a mechanism in order for the Ushers Rate to drop quickly. So we modify the methodology in order for the Ushers Rate not to be reviewed every 3 months based on the information of the last 2 weeks, but to do this monthly. Hence, during recent years, September 1st and October 1st, the Ushers Rate has decreased 124 base points, which is half of the drop of the central bank's interest rate. So the Ushers Rate has to drop, and together with this, we should see a drop in the other rates paid by households. I would like to acknowledge the banks because they've done a very important task. They've reduced housing interest rates. So we've seen a strong competition, and we have housing interest rates that are in around 10%, and some banks are even offering lower rates. This shows the strength of the financial sector as a result of measures related to financial inclusion. The sector is growing, is reaching more regions of the country. It is diversifying its products, and see what has happened to the growth rate of the financial system. It's in levels above or close to 4%. and in a very stable manner, and that's 1/5 of the economy. That's why it is so important. There was a slowdown in the economy with the drop in oil prices, and the sector has maintained a proper level. Why do we say that the worst of the adjustment is part of the past? First, because of trust. These are the indicators of the FEDESarrollo survey. I mean, the willingness to buy houses, that has improved, and also to buy durable goods, household appliances, that has improved, the index has improved. It is very difficult to explain these patterns about consumption surveys. However, there are entities, analysts, that dare to give these explanations. The truth is that we are in a recovery path, and the most important is for this not to be interrupted, in my opinion, which is the risk here, for that trust indicators to be affected by the political polarization in Colombia and also by the uncertainties related to elections. We have to make sure that trust or that this trend is not affected, for the country to continue with a trend that shows continuity, that the framework of the Colombian economic policy is sufficiently sound, that all the political preference will be there in terms of spending for the economy to be managed in such a way that will give trust to the citizens. And we can say that in other countries, they have more trust in Colombia. And we should ask why foreign investors are showing more trust. I think because they see the country with a more objective perspective. They do not have that fog that doesn't allow for us to see many things, mainly because of the political polarization. So the idea is to see Colombia in a more objective manner. And when you compare it to other countries, you see that Colombia has done a good homework. A way to show this: today, 26% of TES are in the hands of foreign investors. In 2012, it was only 3% of TES in the hands of foreign investors. This means that foreigners that had 5 trillion Colombian pesos in TES, today they have more than 65 trillion Colombian pesos in TES. That's just amazing. That's trust. Those are dollars coming into the market, or it's foreign investments. See, Colombia in 2010 received 6 billion Colombian dollars in foreign investment. After the oil prices, we are talking of $11 billion. I mean, that's something that stands out because mainly we've seen a change in the composition today. We have more investment in the non-oil sectors, which is represented by the green part of these bars. So that shows there is trust in the economy. At which rates do we place our bonds in international markets? We issued August to a 10-year bond, $1.4 billion at a rate of 3.8%. That rate is not that different here. It is expressed as the margin over the treasury rates of the U.S. I mean, this really speaks well about Colombia. This margin today with oil at $52 is very similar to the margin we had in 2013 with oil at $109. That is what investors charged to buy Colombian instrument is not that different from what they charged when we had oil at $109. Our main export product, that at that time it represents 1/5 of fiscal earnings. I mean, investors will say one thing is Colombia with oil price at $100 or with oil prices at $50. So the important thing is country risk. Colombia in 2013 had the triple B rating with the oil at $100, and now it has the same rating with oil at $50. This morning, a data was published, and it is this green line. This is a company, it's a private company that measures consumption. The large department stores report online. It's called Radar, and see how much Colombians are spending. The data that was just published is the expenses in households grew 1.2% compared to September last year. It's not a high figure, but it is interesting because we see that we have had 4 consecutive months, from June to September, with positive figures in consumption. In terms of internal demand, consumption is the most important thing for internal demand. Hence, we believe that household consumption is going to recover to end the last quarter with a growth of 3.1%, and that drags the GDP of the business sector or the commercial sector. We have seen a change in the trends of commercial sales and in the industry. These are positive figures, and these are the export figures. See what's happening with traditional exports. They are growing once again, 18%, that's for September. And the non-traditional, they grow 9%, according to the September data. Let us talk about the fiscal policy, which is the main responsibility of the Minister of Finance, and I'm going to summarize it as follows. This is the deficit of the national government. The red dotted line shows the point in time where we introduced a new element to our institutional system, the law of the fiscal rule. The law of the fiscal rule could be explained with many equations in a complicated manner, or you can explain it in a simple way, and it is as follows. This figure you see there after 2012, these figures here, which is the maximum fiscal deficit, or the deficit the government has had, and from there on the projection is a number that in the past could be decided by the government. One decided what type of deficit one wanted to have, obviously taking into account the opinion of rating agencies, of analysts, or after some conversations with the central bank. However, it was an autonomous decision of the government. That's not the case today. What the law of fiscal rule says, and Jorge Humberto is very familiar with this, is that small number is now set by an independent committee. It's a committee of experts where you have former ministers of finance, former governors of the central bank, deans of the School of Economics, directors of research centers. And obviously, they do this analyzing the economic situation of the country. If the economy is below its potential, then they allow for the deficit to be somewhat higher. If oil price is very low compared to a long-term period, they allow more fiscal deficit. So that's the role of this committee. When the law was introduced, we have fully met the rules set with the objectives set by the rules. What does this mean? That's the maximum allowed by the consulting committee. Last year, the deficit was 4% of GDP. This year, 3.6%. And the budget that will be analyzed by the Senate and by the House of Representatives in October is a budget consistent with this figure, that is 3.1%. Looking at this from the historical standpoint, one sees that the deficit we inherited 2009, 2010 was around 4% of GDP. Mr. Carlos Holmes Trujillo is here, and the opposition says, the oil boom was poorly spent. The first answer to this question is, the first thing we did was to reduce the fiscal deficit from 4 to 2% of GDP. That is 2 points less of fiscal deficit. That's the first point. That reduction of the fiscal deficit enabled us to recover the investment decree, to move up one more step and to go to BBB, which is the rating we have today. So the first question, what did we do with oil income, was to reduce the fiscal deficit in 2 points of GDP. There is a second answer. In addition to reducing the fiscal deficit, more investment was enabled. So what did we do with that investment? It's a long answer. Highways, the health system was extended. We also did a lot for the pension system, investment in early childhood, expansion of that program, De Cero a Siempre. I mean, it's an endless list that encompasses all the sectors of the national budget. And the third answer to the oil boom is that the income resulting from oil was not the result of these 4 or 5 years. It's something that benefited Colombia as of 2006 to 2014. This is when Colombia had more income than usual because of oil. The oil boom is not something that has been received only by one administration. What it is indeed a monopoly of this time is that oil income dropped to zero. That's new, and that is what we had to deal with. It has been said also that the increase of the value-added tax has been an issue. And I would like to say the following. The value-added tax enabled us to sort out a problem, and that is whether we shorten social programs because we had a drop in oil income, or we kept those social programs. The dilemma was whether to go or not to go. It was to maintain the social progress of Colombia. If we haven't had the 6 trillion Colombian pesos that were given by those 3 points of value-added tax, we will have had to move backwards in many of the social programs. I would like to mention some of them here, but these are the resources that were part of the budgetary vision. To put it in simple terms, only one of the dimensions. With these resources, we were able to add the budget of the mining energy sector for natural gas and electricity subsidies. If we would have not put those 700 billion pesos during the last quarter, we will not have been able to keep those subsidies. In income level 1, the government subsidizes 60% of the cost. If a house of income level 1 will have to pay the cost, they will pay 47,000 pesos by way of utility bill. We would not have been able to maintain that, or in income level 2, the subsidies of 60%. That's the type of decision we made to maintain what's more important. I mean, the most important thing is to maintain social benefits. I mean, now that Colombia reduced poverty, it would have had to increase poverty. When it comes to the tax policy, we have presented this data in many scenarios. And I always say, if you find something that doesn't look well, we have all the data behind, just analyze them. And if you have a doubt, if you think that's wrong, just let us know. Up to now, no one has said that this data is not correct. It is always difficult to know how much a company pays 1 year in taxes and how much does it pay the next year, because I mean companies change. So I'm going to take the example of a prototype company. It's not a small company. It is a company that has 15 billion pesos in equity. It sells 10 billion pesos per year. It employs 90 people, each one in average. With 2 minimum salaries, and it distributes 50% of its profits by way of dividend. That company in 2010 of 1 billion pesos in profits, they paid 728 pesos in taxes. It's a very large amount, 728 billion. Where contributions to health, well-being, and you recall that those taxes do not pay that anymore. That is what we call parafiscales, the contributions. Equity, 219 million. And now this company is paying 46 by way of equity tax. So this tax disappears as of next year. And by way of income tax, it was 33%. Now this company is paying 33%. So it pays a surcharge on profits above 800 billion pesos. So it pays a surcharge over those 200 billion. But the opposition sometimes says that we had a benefit which was a deduction of 30% by way of productive fixed assets. A company will buy an equipment of 1 billion pesos and it could deduct 300 million pesos as a cost in its financial statements, and that resulted in a savings of 99 billion pesos. The benefit by deducing the purchase of fixed assets. Do you remember that? Those stats no longer exist. So we have a cross-cutting mechanism. So everyone buying machinery of capital goods, that the value added tax that they pay, which is of 90%, is deductible as a cost when you pay taxes. So there is a savings of 72 million pesos. Because what's true in the macro is always true in the micro, in sectoral topics. This sector had a severe problem, and that is the difficulty of issuing annuities policies. The person that reaches retirement age has a savings and they want to make of this an annuity, and that is issued by insurance companies. Insurance companies were reluctant to do this because the annuities is adjusted in the case of those that have an income of a minimum wage. So it's paid based on the increase in the minimum salary, and that's above inflation. So the risk between the increase in minimum wage and inflation was not assumed by insurance companies. So the government decided to cover that risk. Hence, this year, we have 6,500 annuities policy. That's very important. The second topic, last year, we enabled insurers to invest more in new types of products that give more profits, that enable them to diversify the portfolios. So with respect to these alternative assets, 8.5 billion pesos when it comes to life insurance, or private capital funds in infrastructure up to 1.7 billion. So it's to diversify this portfolio in which you can make investments. You have presented the need that the national treasuries will allow tests at 30 years that will have a better match with the insurance companies' assets and liabilities. In other words, I mean, to do that balance between premiums with life insurance that could have payments for 30-year periods with an asset that will have more or less the same structure. In November, we are going to issue tests for a 30-year period for the first time, and they've been considered for the insurance company. That has been one of your requests, and I think that's convenient to us. Why? Because we have 20-year instruments, so we are going to add 10 years. They are indexed to a CPI or to UVR, something that's necessary for financial inclusion. And this is a challenge we have ahead of us. We have correspondence in 1,100 municipalities, that is banking correspondence. The last municipality where we opened one is called Jordan in the department of Santander. So in all the municipalities of Colombia, there is a possibility through the drugstore, through the mom and pop store, of doing these bank transactions, and we have to do the same thing for insurance. I mean, we should have insurance correspondence. So what did we establish in that channel? A product should be standardized. We should have a simple claim process, and correspondents are insurance companies' agents, and we're going to offer this insurance portfolio. This is extremely important. So in each municipality of Colombia, a person through the correspondent can have access to an agricultural or a life insurance. So this is like the new frontier that we have to conquer in the insurance industry to reach all the municipalities with this type of product. Something else. We had a significant change. That is that in the past, insurance policy of mortgage loans were allocated with a criterion where you didn't have that much competition. You would go to Bank A to get a mortgage loan, and that bank tied you right away to a life insurance or to an earthquake policy with the insurance company of that same financial group. And we said that could not be, because the insurance company should be able to compete with that policy regardless of the bank that granted the mortgage loan. So through this decree in 2014, we said that we had to have public bids. So all the banks should allow for insurance companies to participate, and that's good for the mortgage loans. The idea is to be sure that there is more competition in that process. The Bank of Opportunities plays an important role in inclusion, and the idea is to expedite the opening process of insurance correspondence. But we also have these aspects that are part of this joint work between the Trade Association and the Bank of Opportunities. What does this mean? We are willing to use resources of the nation's budget in order to make sure that the activity of insurance companies includes more Colombians, and that is what we have done with these initiatives. I'm almost done. Okay, I've shown the fiscal part, I've shown inflation. Now let us talk about two additional variables the deficit of the reduction of the external deficit, like the one we had in 2015, 6% of GDP. That's not sustainable. That's why we have been adjusting this. This year it's going to be 3.8% of GDP. Economic stabilization, growth. We had a slowdown in growth because of the oil shock this year. We're estimating 2% this year, 3%. So the economy will recover its growth path. Okay, let's see how has Colombia done compared to the rest of Latin America and compared to the group of peers, which are the countries of the Pacific Alliance. We have grown every year above Latin America and above the countries of the Pacific Alliances. These are the forecasts of IMF. We have had a huge shock because of export losses, but we have had a performance above that of the rest of the countries. So that conclusion, the economy has adjusted to this. We're going to have better results. Economic variables are moving in the right path. We are still lacking some elements. There's still a controversy within the central bank if we should lower more or not interest rates. I believe that there's an opportunity to reduce them more. We have a controversy with the financial system with respect to consumption interest rates. That's the channel that enables us to reduce these rates. We have worked on reducing the fiscal deficit by way of income and by way of expenses in order to stabilize the public finances of the country, and all this within a context that has enabled for us to maintain the credibility, the good name of the Colombian economy, and the rating of the Colombian economy. And this indicates that the country is going to recover its growth potential with two new elements, positive elements, with which I conclude this is not the same country we had in the past, not only when it comes to the social, to unemployment, informality. It's not the same country we had in the past. It is a country that has gone through two structural changes that should favor economic growth. First and foremost, peace. I'm not going to dwell on peace here. However, I would like to say that from the economic standpoint, it is clear that the peace cost benefit shows a positive balance regarding the economy in terms of what we need to invest to comply with the adoption of the agreements compared to the economic dividend. Because there is a higher growth. The comparison shows that peace is an important investment. It's a great economic proposition for Colombia. Secondly, another important investment that allows for us to transform. This year, it has been affected by corruption, but we must not lose sight of the transformation of what the investment in infrastructure means for Colombia. Investment in 4G, those two elements increase the growth potential of Colombia. Investment in infrastructure and the economic effects of peace. So we have everything to think with optimism as they see us from abroad as a country that has faced many challenges, many difficulties, but they have all been sorted out successfully. We should feel enthused about it. We live in a strong country, one that progresses, that makes right decisions, that have said no to populism. It has to maintain strong in that line in order to keep on harvesting good economic results. Once again, thank you for your invitation. These have been 6 extraordinary years participating in these fora, and even beyond that, all the progress that has been a characteristic of our country, the insurance sector, with clear, specific results that show that this is an industry advancing hand in hand of the Colombian economy. Obviously, it faces huge challenges, but we are in the right path. Well, thank you very much.